So we're at the top of Chof Gimel on the base. Chof Gimel on the base, very exciting. A new topic. Well, it's related, but it's it actually seems to be in a sort of strange location. This piece, because it's almost because we're talking about dovecots and the fact that they have to be 50 amos away from the city. And you can't make a shovach, a dovecot, and you're your own property unless you have 50 amos in every direction, right? That was the previous mission. And the point of that is that the doves are not allowed to damage. We're worried the doves will damage someone else's field. Remember that? Yeah? The doves, yeah? They might damage someone else's field. That's the problem. So therefore, now the mission says another rule that applies to doves or birds, little birds, fledglings, as to ownership rights. And here we get onto this is a very famous Gemora, this one. It is the sugya of rov and korov, which means when you have a choice of deciding whether you go after the majority or you go after, which is rov, right? Or you go after korov, something which is nearby and therefore more likely because it's close. The question is which one do you go after? So it's a very non-dish sugya, right? About this is the question, yeah? So, as I said, it's Chof Gimel on the base. Travis, that's 23b. Have you got it? Yeah, in the Mishnah. Excellent. Right. So he says like this. The Mishnah says, Nipol nimsa b'soich hamishim amo. A nipol is a little bird. Rashi says it's a gozel, a fledgling, which is found within 50 amos. Hariu shel bala shovach. Says, what does it mean nimsa b'soich hamishim amo? Shel shovach, Rashi says, within 50 amos of the dovecot. The halacha is hariu shel bala shovach. It belongs to the owner of the dovecot. Chutz mechamishim amo. Why? Because we assume that's where it came from, yeah? That's where it came from, right? This dove, this little bird. Chutz mechamishim amos, if it's outside 50 amos, harehu shel motzoi. Then it can be kept by the finders keepers. Bit of strange that, no? What about announcing it? Well, I'll come back to that, right? You know what? Well, you got to just find something. If a bird is a valuable creature, valuable animal, right? Finders keepers, yes. But either way, that's what it says. Outside 50 amos, harehu shel motzoi. The person who finds it can keep it, right? Now, nimtzo bein shnei shevachos. What about if you find this bird between two dovecots? What does that mean? You find it between equidistant. Rashi says b'soich chamishim mishneihem, within 50 amos of the two of them. So you got to think of like a Venn diagram. Isn't that what it's called? You know, a Venn diagram when you've got two overlapping circles, right? So it's within 50 amos of both of them. And then what you do is,
50 amos away from someone else's dovecot.
Do you have to keep? Well, you have to keep 50 amos away from other people's fields and stuff like that. Yeah. Now here we get to the korov bit, right? So it's found between two dovecots and within 50 amos of both of them. So it could be either of them, right? It could belong to either. So we say like this: korov lo zeh shaloi, korov lo zeh shaloi. If it's close to this one, it's his, and if it's close to this one, then it's his. Okay. Mechza al mechza shnei mechloku. What about if it's exactly halfway? Exactly equidistant between the two dovecots? Who is the owner of the bird? The answer is they divide it. Sounds a bit brutal. Of course, it doesn't mean you cut the bird in half. You know, they make, there's half ownership. So one of them can keep it and he pays off the other one. Right? You keep the bird and you pay me 50% of the value. This is obviously before the days when they clip the wings and clip the legs, so they knew the birds belonged to, right? But you can see where this is going, because this is the key question. We are defining ownership here, at least at the end of the Mishnah. Well, actually, the whole thrust of the Mishnah, yeah, is basically defining ownership on the basis of proximity. Proximity, proximity. Because it's nearby, the logical assumption is that this belonged to the place that was closest to it, and therefore that person can claim ownership, and that's a halachic claim of ownership on the basis of korov, on the basis of being in close proximity, even though it could quite conceivably undo it. It could be it flew in from Africa, this bird. I mean, it's a little bird, so it's unlikely, but you don't know where it came from, right? You've got no idea. But we're saying that because it was it's close by, therefore it's likely it belongs to this dovecot. Now, the big question here, of course, which is what the Gemora will deal with, one of the questions is, we're talking about a bird that can fly, maybe a bird that can hop. That's quite important. Because if it's a flying bird, it's much more difficult to understand if you like. Why ownership should be determined on the basis of korov, proximity, yeah, alone. We'll see. So that's the Mishnah. Okay, so now the Gemora says like this. Gemara says this. Okay, just one point. Sorry, just because it's really kind of a side point. It's worth dealing with first of all before we get back to the what's it called? The bit about the the key element of the Mishnah, which is the good Toras asks that in Perek Elu Metzias, Bob Metzia, right? That's the classic Perek which deals with lost and found. So Reb Shimon, the Rabbanon of Reb Shimon and Loza, there's a machlokas, I think, Rabbanon, Reb Shimon and Loza, and the Rabbanon say, even in a city that's the majority non-Jewish, you have to still announce it. You have to announce the lost item, right? If it's got a simon, it's got a sign, a recognizable sign. And Tosfos says, how is it that you can go after? How is it here that the finder is allowed to keep it? Okay. Now the logic. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. The logic of why the finder is allowed to keep it when it's outside 50 amas is because the principle of ruba de alma. We assume it comes from the majority of the world in general, and therefore there's no particular ownership claim on it from that perspective. Certainly that it doesn't. There's no on the basis of Rome, it won't belong to Yisrael. There's a whole. That's the assumption. Okay. So the Gemara says, but there, Tosfos says, you should still have to announce it. You should still have to announce it if it's got a simon. And Tosfos says, why there do we not go after the majority? Basra Rabbi, why do you not go after the majority? Why do they have to announce it? So therefore, he says that there it was a takana, Chacham instituted. You should be able to fulfill the mitzvah Hashavas Haveda because the process of announcing it will enable you to verify that. Okay. In other words, there's a difference. In other words, the process of announcing it that's described in Bob Metzia will enable you to verify ownership, and the Yisrael will come forward. He won't give up hope because he thinks maybe Yisrael will find it and go through the process of announcing it. But that's all specific. It seems to be specific to a town, a localized area, a town, right? Do you understand? That's why Chazal instituted the process of announcing whatever. Here, the logic of the person who finds it being able to keep it is there is no location. There's just the world where this bird is part of, right?
Does the bird have a simon?
No, even if it does, it seems to be. It does seem to be, even if it has a simon. That's what it seems to be. That's why you can just claim. That's why we don't come into Hashavas Haveda here. That's what I'm trying to say. We don't get into the topic of Hashavas Haveda here, returning a lost item. Seems to be.
Assuming it's not a wild bird.
Yes, but it could be anywhere, and therefore you could be from anyone in the world, wide world. It's a fledgling, but it could be from anyone in the wide world. That's the point. Yeah. That's why you go after what's called.
Fledgling must have come from someone, and it's domesticated. It must have come from someone's.
Potentially, and that's why you come on to Ruba de Alma.
And it's got a specific simon.
I think the point is,
you might get some birds might have a very distinct mark.
Yes, they might have.
Fledglings wouldn't have that. Fledglings are different to grown birds.
It might just have some like birthmark or some colour, something that distinguishes it from.
I don't think biologically that's.
I don't know.
It's like the classic ugly duckling. Doesn't look like a duckling.
Yeah, I mean, if you can see, can you see the?
Fledgling.
Yeah.
If it's a grown bird, it could have markings or a ring or whatever.
The thing is, even if it does, that's the point. I think Tosfos is establishing here that the whole topic of Hashavas Haveda is not relevant here. Look at Rabbeinu Gershom. Right? There's the tiny print on the side. Can you see? Yes. It's always good to find these very tiny. Yeah. Can you see that? Can you see Rabbeinu Gershom on the right, the outermost column? Yeah. Count 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. He says, why is it that outside 50 amas it belongs to the finder? Because one can say, it just fell by a passerby. Once you're in that setup, right, it could have fallen from anyone, anywhere, anyone in the world. Someone dropped it. They were on their way somewhere and they dropped it, right? So then there's no ownership claim on this thing at all. The whole inyan of Hashavas Haveda essentially seems to only be applicable to Yisraelim anyway. You understand? So there's no real, the topic, it doesn't apply, right? It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. So you just go after that's what Tosfos means by saying you assume it's Ruba, you go after Ruba de Alma.
Even if it had a ring on it saying this is
I think so.
bird and this is the phone number.
No, that might be different. That's a different question. Then we'll have to worry about Eva as well. I don't think we're talking about that. Something like that. I mean,
So Korov is proximity, and what Rove? I missed that.
majority.
Majority what? And spacage.
No, the majority of people in the world.
So how does the two differ then?
What do you mean?
If it's between two towns or
You've got a dilemma as to who this bird belongs to. Okay. The bird could either belong to the person who owns the dovecot, or it could belong to the wide world out there. Yeah, it came from somewhere else.
outside of the town.
Yes, outside the town. Anyway, outside of the area near the dovecot, near the shovach, right? Now, the point is in the Mishnah is that the Mishnah says once if it's within 50 amas, and we're going to challenge this in the Gemora, if it's within 50 amas, you assume it goes to the owner of the dovecot. It's his bird. Must have come from there, right? Once it's outside 50 amas, forget about the dovecot, and the person who finds it can keep it. Why? Because it comes from the Ruba de Alma. The Ruba de Alma means it comes from somewhere else in the world. The majority, the only way, the majority of the world is there is no obligation to return it to. You have an ability to return it to anyway, right? And from the way Tosfos is understanding it, that the mitzvah of Hashavas Haveda also doesn't apply, because that will only apply in a case where it's possible. The whole mitzvah only applies to Yisrael. So therefore, there's no, and therefore that's it. That's it. You understand? Therefore, you can keep it, right? If you can keep it. Again, we're not going into a situation like you're saying where he's got a phone number on. That's already a shayla of Geneva. You know who the owner is. We're not talking about Geneva, right? That's more than a simon. That's an ownership claim. That belongs to. It's his bird. You take it from. There's a Farmer Jones a mile down the road, right? Who has doves, and it says this is Farmer Jones' dove. That's not a lost bird, right? That's a question of you wouldn't, Ellie. No, you don't. Yeah. Is that all right? Yeah, right. Now the Gemara's.
There's no nest. There's nothing. It's just.
Yeah, you could have gone for anyone. Anyway, like Rabbeinu Gershom says, it may over enough, and it fell out of someone's. Someone was driving along the road, and it slipped out. He could be 50 miles. He could be 50 exactly off the back of a lorry, literally. He could be 50 miles halfway to Manchester by now. You've got no idea where it comes from, right?
Is that the important fledgling?
Well, I think the point about the fledgling is an important one.
It had to be.
Someone left it there, yeah. Well, the point about the fledgling we'll come back to, because we're going to have to decide whether it's a hopping bird or a flying bird, and there's a big difference. So yeah. So we'll come back to it. It could be indeed the point. The significance of fledgling is noted. Yes. So let's see. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina says, so Rabbi Chanina says, in a situation, and he's not talking about this case. He's talking about a general principle. If you have a dilemma as to how to establish something that's in doubt, and you have two options of working out what to do, and you can either go after the majority to resolve it. We'll give cases soon, right? Or you can say, I'll resolve it through going by korov, what's close by. You go after the majority. And even though the principle of rov, going after the majority, is a min haTorah principle, the korov d'oraisa and being close by is also min haTorah. Even so, ruba odif, the majority takes precedence, right? The majority takes precedence. Okay, and you've got to forget about our Mishnah, because we're going to ask on this from our Mishnah. Okay, just take Rabbi Chanina at face value. We'll come back to what he does with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is problematic in this regard, because our Mishnah talks about close proximity, right? Rabbi Chanina says, just you go after the majority. You go after the majority, exactly. And what that means, again, we can use our Mishnah as a case study to explain what he would say. Logically, that means, okay, you have a dove you don't know who the dove belongs to. There's a dovecot nearby, within 50 amas. like literally a few meters away, and you have a little bird here. And I've got a choice. I can either say, well, it probably fell out of that dovecot, or I can say, okay, there are, one little dovecot there, and there's 1 million doves in the world, right? So on the basis of majority, if I discount korov, close proximity, it's more logical to say it came from the majority of birds in the world, the rove. You with me? Rove korov, halech achar rove. The will say, forget about korov that was near something. I think it doesn't have nothing to do with it, right? You go after the majority. Majority means it came from out there, which would mean the person who finds it could keep it. Yeah? Exactly. That's what it would mean in practical sense. Yeah, that's what Rabbi Birnbaum would say. Okay, we're going to ask on our mission. Now, he says an important thing here. He says that both rove is min haTorah and korov is min haTorah. And even sofilachi ruba od, if ruba takes precedence. Now, how do you see they're both min haTorah? So the Gemora is going to the Gemora is going to bring at least one of them. Let's see Rashi first. Rashi says, rove korov, im bo dova lefonein. Something comes in front of us. The yesh bo lahalech acha horov, v'hukach. And you can go after the majority and the result will be A. V'im telech by acha korov, and if you go after the proximity, okay, eino kach. Do you have a different result? Halich achar horov, halich ba achar horov. You go after the majority. That's how it works. Even though they're both min haTorah, ruba d'oraisa. How do you know min haTorah? How do you know rove is d'oraisa? You go after the majority to tilt in a certain direction. Acharei rabbim lahatos. The Torah says clearly, go after the majority. That's how every case of the Sanhedrin, right, is based on the principle of rove, of the majority. That's how they decide a case. Yes, 3 dayanim, 2 against 1, 23. What?
There's a sentient people who have a vote and
Okay.
decide things. This is not the same kind of thing. This is kind of a random sample.
But the principle is still the same, because the principle of, firstly, the concept of rove is learnt out from that. Even though there is, I hear the distinction, but the idea of going after the majority to decide something, even when you don't know. I mean, there may be intelligent people.
To judge.
Yeah, to judge, but you still don't know, right? Some people say it's forbidden. Some people say it's chayiv. Some people say it's potter. You don't know. We don't know. If I'm an outsider, I have no idea. They might be right. Who says just because there's one less? Just because there's one less, who's right? I don't know who's right. The Torah says that rove is rove. The concept of rove makes a difference. That's how rove works. We'll give another example in a second, but that's how you know rove is min haTorah. The korov d'oraisa, proximity. Korov is also min haTorah. Now this is fascinating. How do you see in the Torah? That's right. That's right. Exactly. How do you see in the Torah the concept of korov, that proximity itself is also min haTorah? With the Agla Rufa, where you have a person who dies, and you don't know who, and he's in the middle of a field somewhere or whatever, and you don't know who killed him. So the Torah says hakrova el hecholol, end of Parsha Shoftim, the city which is closest to the corpse, they have to do. We assume they're responsible, and they have to do the whole procedure like a roof, and they smash the back of the calf's neck and the whole story, right? This is a clear proof that korov is also min haTorah. So Rabbi Chanina's chiddush is, right, that even though both are min haTorah, rove takes precedent. Now, go on.
Well, the rove is expressed as a general rule, as a klal, whereas in the concept of Egel Arif, it's in the concept of Egel Arif. You could say the rule only applies in the case of Egel Arif. It's not expressed.
Well, not necessarily, because you could bring Eli's point. I mean, the case of rove is also specific.
Is it?
Well, it is. It's talking about a Sanhedrin and based in. That's the context.
Tilt towards majority. Is that more specific?
The simple shot in the Pasuk in Mishpatim, which is, I think, was what you asked, right? It is in the context of judgment, right? It's the whole thing is talking about that. What does it say? What does it say? Acharab lahatos lesana rivlin toes. You shouldn't tilt. You know what I mean. The whole thing, the whole parsha there is talking about judgment in general. But Tosfos here brings another case because Tosfos asked a basic question. Well, what's the chiddush? What's he telling us? It's like we know this from elsewhere. The very famous Gemora in Ksubas about the shops. You know the case about the shops. You have a city with 10 shops. Remember this? Yeah, this is everyone's favorite yeshivish sugya. Yes, Gemora, right? You have 9 shops selling, right, kosher meat, and 1 shop selling treif, and you find a piece of meat in the street. Where does it come from? Yeah, it comes from the kosher shop. Why? Halecha chorov. Benimtza halecha chorov. The Chiddush is where you have kol kavua kamechza mechza only, right? Okay, the Gemora there says two things. The Gemara says you have a city, and inside the city are 10 shops, 9 selling kosher, 1 selling treif, right? You find a piece of meat inside one of the shops. It was taken from you took it in, you bought it inside one of the shops, but cannot recall which shop you bought it from. Silly thing to do, but you can't remember whether you went into the shop which sells pork or you went into the one which sells, yeah, right? And there are 9. Yeah? So you'd say, oh, chances are, I probably took it from the one that says kosher, because 9 sell kosher. I probably did that. So doesn't matter, because we have a very, very unusual rule, which is kol kavua kamechza mechza domi. Whenever you take it from a fixed location, you've got to treat it as half-half. Even if you're 99 one way and 1 the other way, if it's in a fixed location, this throws a massive spanner in the works, and you always treat it as 50-50. Okay, we're not dealing with that here. On that, the Gemara said,
if you make your dove hektish,
yes,
and it flies into
another kinim, the whole thing about kinim,
yes.
the second kinim, very complicated Mishnah.
Then you have a real problem with all the other birds.
That's right. You do.
So there, the minority bird makes.
Yeah, but that might be to do with hektish not being bottle, not being, there's a, you're trying to nullify hektish there. It's slightly different. It's not so much the majority. For example, truma. Yeah. So truma falls into a large amount. It's still true. What was truma bottle? Echad Mosayim, I think 1 in 200. I think truma is bottle. There are different rules with bottle. The nullification is different. It's a slightly different thing. I think. Also, there you can't be mevatel it because it's still a choshev, something specific, significant. You can't. Anyway, we're going to get in. We'll get into also. But the Gemara. Anyway, the reason why I'm telling you this thing about the Gemara there. So the Gemara says, "Ubenimtza halecha chorov." If you find a piece of meat in the street, okay, and you don't know where it came from, you didn't walk into the shop and buy it in the shop. You find it in the street. The halacha is you go after the majority. Even, says Tosfos, the implication is even if it's closer to the kosher shop. Right? Treif shop. Sorry, the treif shop. Yeah. Even if it's closer to the treif shop. That's what the Gemara in Ksubas implies.
But not if it's demonstrably not a piece of kosher meat.
Yeah, if it looks like a piece of pork, then you're ruined.
So
Basra Rabbi, that's right. Yeah.
So the point is, this bird is identifiable in some fashion.
But then it would be different. If you can tell where the bird comes from, it's a different story. The whole principle is only relevant where we cannot verify on the basis of observation alone whether it comes from the majority or from the proximity, right? Korov or Rov, right? That's the whole thing. However, where we can, obviously it's going to be different, right? You say that all bets are off. If you can tell it's got a little trotter hanging off it, then obviously it came from the treif shop. Now, but the point is, okay, Tosfos has we're not going to go through this whole Tosfos, but I'm bringing this as another example of where you have it's a classic, simple example of Rabbi Chanina's klal. It's very important we understand it because we can talk about it for a long time. Yeah, you understand? Rabbi Chanina's klal is very simple. Yes, it is rov v'kor b'alecha rov. You got a choice. You go after majority or proximity. The meat case is a really simple, straightforward case of understanding. It's 10 shops, 9 selling kosher, 1 selling treif. Right? Rabbi Chanina would say even if the piece of meat that you find in the street is really close to the treif shop, doesn't matter. The majority of shops in the town sell kosher. Go after the majority. Okay, you with me? That's okay. Tosfos resolves why Rabbi Chanina doesn't rely on the Mishnah there by saying that Rabbi Chanina's chiddush is even where it's what's called a kurva de muchach. It's like a really strong proof that it's that it's from the thing that was close by. You still discount it. Okay, that's his extra thing that he's telling us beyond that Gemora and Ksubas. But leave that to the side as for now. Okay, we got Rabbi Chanina good. So now the Gemara asks like this: Mosiv Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asks a question from the pasuk. How can Rabbi Chanina go against the pasuk? The pasuk says the city which is closest to the corpse, in the case of the Eglah Rufa, they are the ones who who have to provide the kapara. Yes, they're the ones who have to do it through the process of the Eglah Rufa. Torah says that. Implying even if there's a city there, another city around the corner on the hill, right, that is much bigger You go after the city that's closest by. They're the ones who bear responsibility for the dead man and have to go through the process of kapara. So the Gemara says that seems to go against Rabbi Chanina's klal. Now,
Is gives us a specific reason for that.
About Egla Rufa, which is what?
Because the town closest should have accompanied the man.
Yeah, but if you say Rov B'Korov Halecha Rov, then the burden of responsibility you would assume would go with the larger town.
No, because the place he was closest to was obviously the place that he was.
Yeah,
No, we don't know where he came from. We don't know where he came from.
He's
He's dead in the field.
Could be going. He could have been going to.
No, we don't. We want to. Who bears responsibility, right? The Torah says the closest town. So the implication is, even if there's a massive metropolis slightly further away, you go after the city, the little village that's close by, right? So that Gemara says, well, that goes against Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says, Rov Akarv Alecha Harov. You go after the majority. So they should bear responsibility for his death. They should say, we didn't accompany him.
That's our reason. The Torah is saying, no, the town nearest, because that town should have accompanied that man.
But how do you know they didn't? Maybe he came from the larger city.
So we can't just make an assumption that I would have thought it's a bigger town.
No, but why? Well, the question is, why is the Torah saying that? The Torah is saying to us that the city which
doesn't need a reason. It's just saying that's the halacha, because we can assume that the town closest by was the one that should have accompanied.
But that means he must have come from there. It's a resolution of the doubt, meaning we don't know where he came from. So the Torah says the city that's closest, we assume he came from there.
But if
so why do we assume he came?
We should do it, then we would say, okay, maybe we should go for the largest town. But the Torah isn't. It's very specific. It says the closest town must do it in this case.
The closest town must do it, but the reason is because it's not a chayik. The reason why it says clearly, Yodeinu l'shofar damazel, like you say, it's not a chayik, right? It's not like it's got a reason for it. The reason is because they bear responsibility for his death because they should have looked after him effectively. Yeah. Right? So the question is like this: if Rabbi Chanina's klal is true, and remember he's arguing that it's min haTorah because both are min haTorah, so we're talking on the level of din Torah. Yeah, because both Rov and Korov have a source in the Torah, right? If it's true that in a case of doubt, where you don't know how to resolve, you have a suffix, and you don't know whether to resolve it on the basis of the majority of the Rov or Korov, and you say you go after the Rov, then that burden of responsibility should, by definition, rest on the larger town. And we should say, the Torah should say, V'hoya ha'er ha'gedola, right? The larger city should do this process and say we didn't shed his blood and that type of thing because we should assume he came from the larger place, not the car of the Rov. That's the problem.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that's if we didn't know, then we would say okay rather than husbands. But because the Torah specifically tells us here that in this case you go with one that's closer.
Right. So you're saying that the Torah is telling us here. You discount the Rov, and here you go after the Korov.
Yes.
The problem is that Rabbi Chanina's klal then is not correct, because if it seems to be that the halacha of Egla Rufa is based on there is a logical principle behind it. We don't know how to sort of where to put the burden of responsibility. And the Torah says, in a case where you don't know where to put the burden of responsibility, you put the burden of responsibility of the death on the town that's closest by. But why? If the svara, if the logic of Rov and Korov is correct, right, that you go after Rov, not Korov, yeah, then you should, that shouldn't be the case. It's very difficult to say. Again, this is a logical thing. It's not a chok, right? It's not like a just without reason. There's a logic here. Rabbi Chanina says that in a case where you've got a doubt, it's more likely that it comes from the majority than it comes from proximity. Korov. So if you see a clear case study in the Torah where the Torah discounts that and says no, ignore the majority, go after the Korov, then that would throw a bit of a spanner in the works. I hear what you're saying. You can say, well, this is an exception, but I think the point is that that doesn't work so well because it's not, there is a logic here, and if you say the logic doesn't apply there, why not? I think so. Does that make sense? I think so. You say enough. What?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Gemara then does a classic, what's called a dichui, right? Which means it pushes it away. It's not a resolution. It's saying you can't prove from here against Rabbi Chanina because we can say that the scenario the Torah is talking about is B'deleka, where there is no larger city. That sounds a bit like a cop-out, but the point is it's not a proof against him. That's the whole point of a dichui. Dichui means to push away. You're trying to bring me a knockout blow from Egla Rufa. Egla Rufa, you got Korev and Rove, and you go after the Korev, not the Rove. No, because it's not clear that we're talking about a case where there's another city. Maybe B'deleka, there's no other city. V'lezel Basra Rabbi Birnbaum, why did you go after the majority in the world? That means to say the Rabbi Birnbaum. I mentioned this principle. What does it mean the Rabbi Birnbaum? Just the world in general. Maybe there is clearly a choice there. We don't know where the murderer came from. The murderer could have come from the close by city. The murderer could have come from the 1,000 axe murderers that are out there in the world. There's more axe murderers in the world than there are in the little shtetl next to this poor bloke. True? The answer says, so why didn't you go after the Rove, if Rabbi Chanina is correct? So the answer is B'Yosheves Bein HaHorim. B'Yosheves Bein HaHorim. This is an isolated spot, but amongst mountains. There is no other settlement. There are no other people coming nearby. Look at Rashi. The second Rashi. That's further away. That's larger than it with many more people. And the Gemara says, B'Deleka, where there isn't Rechoka Mizu, Shegadola Mimeno. There isn't one that is further away from this that is larger than it. They're all equal. They're all equal. So the Gemara says, and the answer we said, the murderers don't usually come from other places to here. That's not if it's an isolated settlement, then there's no reason to there's no reason to say that they came from anywhere else. So again.
Doesn't need the base.
What?
The city.
Does it? It could be, maybe. What, to bring an Egla? Yes, because it's based in, they say. Okay, it could be, yeah. Maybe that's the only scenario we may apply. Again, like I said, there's many cases where we have this. Rabbi Chanina sets out a klal. The Gemara asks a problem. The Gemara says the case of Egla Rufa seems to be that we go after Korev and not Rove, right? Even though there's a Rove option, we go after the Korev option. Well, it's not necessarily. You can't prove that case. It's not a knockout blow for Rabbi Chanina, because it's only be a knockout blow for Rabbi Chanina if the only way of understanding the scenario of Egla Rufa would be where there is both a Rove and a Korev option, and you take the Korev option. That's a knockout to Rabbi Chanina. But if you say that the case of Egla Rufa might be talking about where there is no Rove, it might be that's talking about an isolated area or something like that, where there's no other Rove option. You can tell me that's very difficult. The Torah should have said it, should have spelled out, but it's still not a knockout blow. You with me?
Still two towns. It's not necessarily a bigger one.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a big one. There's an isolated place. There's no. You can't prove that we're talking about where there was a Rove option. There is a Rove option there. Yeah.
The Torah says you have to measure.
Yes, that's right.
So you do have to find two places.
Yes, but there may not be one where there's a larger one.
One's always going to be larger than the other one. I don't understand because one is always. You're not going to get.
It's going to be larger.
Rashi says Kol on Shabbos. They're all equal. They're all equal. And you'll tell me that's so unlikely that's going to occur, right? One town's going to be a bit larger than the other. And again, that's why when you see something like this in the Gemara, it was thinking in your mind, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Again, it doesn't matter. It's true. It's true. Sometimes you find something more so often, and people say, when you see something like this in the Gemara, you think, that's never going to happen. It doesn't matter. To destroy an argument, it's all logic. To destroy an argument, right? You've got to have a case that can only be explained in a way that defeats the logic. Rabbi Chanina's logic will be defeated by this case of Egla Rufa only if the only way of explaining Egla Rufa was a case where one town was larger than the other. If he can say back, I can find you a case where they're the same, there's no proof. There's no proof. Yeah. Yeah. Now the Gemara. Now we come on to our mission. Okay, you with me? Okay. So Rabbi Chanina so far is still standing. His klal. But how's he going to explain our Mishnah? So our Mishnah says, the fledgling which is found within Chamishim Amor, within 50 Amos, if you find that bird within 50 Amos, you assume it belongs to the owner of the dovecot. That means even if there's another one that's larger. Where is that other one? Outside. Obviously outside the 50 amos, that's the case, yes? Rashi says, there's one which is outside 50 amos, which is larger than this one, That's the implication. You go after the proximity to this shovach, even if there's another one outside 50 amos, which is much larger. You might have a massive shovach down the road, massive dovecot. Doesn't matter. You go after the one that's closest. That's a question of Rabbi. So the one b'deleka, there is none. There is none.
So what's the question on the Mishnah says that?
The question from the Mishnah is that Rabbi Chanina says that Rov Korov Alecha Chorov, you go after the majority. The Mishnah seems to say, just take it at face value. You have a radius, that's the right word, isn't it? Yeah, around a dovecot, and you say that a bird that's found within 50 amos of this dovecot in any direction, it belongs to the dovecot, it belongs to the shofar, right? Implying, even if just outside the 50 amos, you've got a guy who's got a massive dove farm. You understand it?
Well, yeah, so the Mishnah's telling us that. That seems to be very clear.
Which is a problem with Rabbi Chanina, yeah?
What?
Yeah, you agree with the question?
But the Mishnah's, I thought the debate was only if it was in like, exactly midway.
Well, we'll get to the second part of the Mishnah in a minute. But even before you get to the second part of the Mishnah about the midpoint and how they divide it up or whatever, right? Just look at the first case of the Mishnah. The first case of the Mishnah seems to be a clear question of Rabbi Chanina. First case of the Mishnah says, go after Korov, you go after proximity, you discount whatever else is around. Even if,
If they're both, if you've got two dovecots within 50,
yeah,
it's nearer to the smaller one.
Yeah.
And there's a much bigger one also within 50. It's like an angular roof sort of.
Well, no, that's a different question, because there you're asking if one is Korov and one is Rov and Korov. That's different. You've got one which is close by, another one which is close by and also larger. That's not, Rabbi Chanina not talking about that. Then you might have a good strong argument. You go after the Rov and the one which has got both, right? He's not talking about that. It's either or. The only scenario he's talking about is where you've got a choice. One is Korov, but not Rov. One is Rov, not Korov. That makes sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking it's nearer the smaller one, but bigger one still within the 50. Because I mean, you've got the competition of the criteria because they're both within 50.
Oh, it's nearer the smaller one.
It's nearer the
I see.
But the big one's still within 50.
If it's if it's within, that's not the case. That's the thing. The case is where it's within 50 amos of the shovach. There isn't any other one within the 50 amos. That's the implication. The Gemora answers the same answer. Again, it's another tichvi, just pushing it away. B'deleka, there isn't. There's not another one, right? B'deleka, there is another one. There's no other shovach there outside the 50 amos. There's no other dafka, right? So therefore, because there's no other, there's no robe. There's no question of Rabbi Chanina. He can just say the Mishnah somewhere where there was no other large shovach. Yachiv so Amos Sefer. Look at the end of the Mishnah. Look at the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah, and where the end of the Mishnah says Chutz mechamishim alma, outside 50 amas areu shel motzai. It belongs to the person who found it. The ibedeleika, if there is no other dovecot in sight, v'adai me'ahu nafal. It must have fallen from this one. There's a fundamental problem here, There's a fundamental problem here, which is, if you're telling me this is the only dovecot around, this is the only shovach around, how can you say, outside 50 amas I can keep it? Where else does it come from? It must have come from there. Yeah? Okay? Now, again, we could have asked another question here. If Rashi says, look at Rashi, it could have asked the question that we said before, the same question as we asked on the previous case. Let's go after the majority of the world. There's always a rove here. Okay, there's no large dovecot just outside Chamishim Amah, but there's always a rove. There's always a rove out there. There's always the majority of birds that exist in the world. It's got a better question. It's got a better question. That's why we asked this question. The better question that Gemora asks is, how can you say that there is no other shovach, there's no other dovecot outside? because if there is no other one, it must have fallen from this one. Okay. Yeah. I mean, Toras gives another resolution why we can't be talking about you go after the majority of the world. He says we're talking about the case is where there's no shovach within what's it called? Within 30 risks, which is we said they can't fly further than that. They can't fly further than that, right? So there's no possibility of it coming from somewhere else far away. Because it's just simply too far away. Anyway, the point is that how can you keep it? So now the Gemara introduces a massive change to our whole Mishnah and says, are you with me? You with me, right? You understand the problem? You understand? Yeah, you understand what we're doing here, right? We've got Rabbi Chanina is Rov V'Karav Holechav go after the majority. So Rabbi Chanina has to find a way of explaining our Mishnah in such a manner that there is no Rov. There is no majority, and that's why you go after Korov, because otherwise you should always go after Rov. Rabbi Chanina says you've got a choice. If it's proximity and majority, follow majority. Our Mishnah says proximity, Korov. How can that be? The only way of explaining it must be that there is no Rov. There is no majority. How can there be no majority? Because this is the only shovach that exists.
But you said there's always
No, so Tosfos deals with that. Rashi says, yes, the Gemara could have asked that question. Tosfos says, no, the scenario is that there is no shovach within flying distance, which is like 30 risks. Whatever risk is. It's a long way. Yeah, you understand? Doves can't fly forever, right? There's a certain distance, right? So there is nothing else other than this one. And therefore, says Rabbi Chanina, someone comes along, so Rabbi Chanina will explain the mission like this, Someone comes along, finds a little bird, says, oh, where does that come from? He thinks to himself, well, hold on a second. Rove? No, there's no rove. Must come from the korah, must come from that dovecot. Problem is that explaining the Mishnah like that, yes, creates a catch-22 situation, which is the only way we can explain the Mishnah is that there is no other birds. So we have no rove. We only have this little dovecot and this little bird. If so, how on earth can you keep it? How can you keep it if it's outside 50 amas? It must have come from that dovecot. There's nowhere else within flapping distance. You agree? Paul, you understand?
Sorry, we said before that someone could have just been walking past, dropped it.
Yeah, the back of a lorry.
Yeah, that's what we said before. That's true. That's true. Or we seem to be assuming now that
that's less probable if there's a nearby.
Maybe that's why Rashi doesn't like Tosfos' pshat. So Rashi just says the Gemara could have asked that. Could have said there's always a majority. The Gemara could have taken that line of questioning, okay? Tosfos says the Gemara doesn't go down that line of questioning because we can have a situation where they can't fly so far. Maybe Rashi doesn't like that because there's always a possibility of something somehow getting there. I don't know. At the back of the lorry example, maybe not a good one because you're already.
The fledgling from that.
Yes. Yes.
Leaves
yes.
and drops it.
And drops it. Yes.
Then it's not belonging to that.
Yes. And he could have got it from somewhere else. Exactly. But it's I mean, we're introducing a foreign element by talking about a truck with doves on. Maybe we should leave the truck out of the picture and keep it simple. It could be that Rashi doesn't like that because the Tosfos, and that's why Rashi says, yes, the Gemara could have asked this question. Instead of the Gemara asking, if so, how can you keep it outside 50? If this is the only dovecot, I should have gone to that one. That's the Gemara's question, right? It must belong to that even outside 50 amas. Rashi says an alternative question the Gemara could have asked was, there's always a Ruba Da'alma, there's always a majority out there in the world. And therefore you can't just remove the rove. So either way, Rabbi Chanina is stuck with our Mishnah. Okay, he's got to give a radical different explanation in the Mishnah.
But if we do eliminate there being a rove, then there's no question because you've only got one criterion, which is korah.
Yes, but Rashi says the Gemara could have asked that you cannot eliminate the rove because there's always a majority, a rove out there somewhere. Okay, that's what Rashi learns, right? Tosfos seems to say, no, you can have a situation where there's no rove out there because it's so far away, there's no dovecots for miles and miles and miles and miles. There's no possibility of coming anywhere else. And on that, the Gemara gives another question. What is the Gemara's question? How can you keep it? If that's the only one, how can you keep it? It must have come from there. Okay, who cares? It's 50 amas, 100 amas, 150 amas, 200 amas. This is the only dovecot in the world as far as we're concerned. Not literally, but you understand. So therefore, the only way he can explain the Mishnah is it's radically transforming it. We're talking about a bird, a little bird, a fledgling that can only hop. Yeah, a little hopping bird cannot hop more than 50 amas. Now that's changed everything. There's a long Rashi here, and Rashi's going to explain the whole Mishnah, how Rabbi Chanina learns the Mishnah. Can you see Rashi Hachal my skin on? Yeah? You see that?
There's a logic to that. Otherwise, you could just wait for the bird to keep going outside 50 yards, then pick it up and take it. So you have to have some kind of
Right. Yes, that's interesting actually. I don't know if that would work, because if you saw it within 50, you're ruined. You can't stand there. It's like the vulture waiting. It's like the vulture. You can't stand like a vulture. Come on, go a bit further. Can't do that because it's within 50. You know it belongs to.
You haven't taken possession of it. Just watching the bird.
Yeah. You can't. No, you can't sit there like a vulture.
What?
I didn't see it. Didn't see it. Yeah. I have halachically not viewed you. No. Kula mas nisin, says Rashi. Kula mas nisin mitzvah b'medadeh. The whole Mishnah can be explained with a bird that can only hop. What's that? Begozel she'eno yochel la'uf, a bird that cannot fly. Ela b'didui ma'at ma'at. It can just hop bit by bit. Hilkach 4. This is the way you explain the Mishnah. Toch 50 amah shel ba'al hashova. Within 50 amas, it belongs to the owner of the dovecot. Va'afal gav de'ika acharini chutz la-50 amah denofesh. There might be a massive dovecot outside 50 amas that's much larger than this little one, but it's irrelevant because it cannot come from there. Any bird that hops, we have a principle, which is the Chazal said a bird does not hop more than 50 amas. So you with me? So therefore, that's a brilliant solution, because there is no row. There's no majority. There's no massive dovecot waiting on the wings outside. There's no majority of birds outside. It can't get more than 50 amas, and there is only one dovecot within the 50 amma radius. If it's outside the 50, it belongs to the finder. Since it can't hop more than 50, this bird clearly did go outside 50. So how did that happen? Well, how did that happen? What do you mean? We just said a bird can't hop more than 50. And this one is outside 50. It must be that it's not a hopping bird. You've got to prove it must be able to fly, even though you can't see it flying. You see a little tiny bird. But if it's outside 50 amas away from the dovecot, the only way it could have got there is by flying. You follow, yes? And therefore, that's why you go after the majority of the world. And that's why the finder can keep it. Because now we say it fell off it flew in from anywhere. We don't keep it anywhere. Flame on, you can keep it, right?
So why can't I say it hops? I missed that.
No, because once you see a bird that's more than 50 amas away from a dovecot, the only way it could have got there is by flying. Once you've established it's a flying bird, you can keep it. Because flying birds, Rabbi Chanina's principle applies. Rove, forget about Korov. I don't care. There's only one dovecot in sight. It came from them. It came from anywhere. It could have come from 100 miles away, flown in, long distance travel. You understand, right? So Rabbi Chanina has done a very, very clever thing here. He's interpreted the Mishnah. Well, he hasn't done that. We've explained the Mishnah according to him. Yeah, that the Mishnah can be explained as talking about a bird that our starting assumption is that it can only hop, and therefore, if you find it within 50 amas, yes, it belongs to the owner of the little dovecot that's there. Why? Because it can't get more than 50 amas. So I don't care that there's lots of dovecots outside and there's 100 amas away and there's all birds that could have come anywhere in the world. It doesn't make a difference to me. Why? Because it can't come from there because it can only go 50 amas. It's just a hopping bird, right? And that's why his rule of rove and korov doesn't apply in this case, because there's no rove. There is only the bird and the dovecot. There is only the bird and the shofar, right? If you find it outside 50 amas, that's totally different. Then it belongs to the person who finds it. Because then, if it's outside 50 amas away from the shofar, it must have flown. Once it must have flown, Rabbi Chanina's principle kicks in, which is ignore the proximity of this shofar and go after Ruba D'Alma. And remember, Ruba D'Alma means I can keep it. With me? Okay? Now don't worry about the second half of the Mishnah, because we're going to deal with that next week. But there's another little piece here, which is a fascinating little Gemora. Right? Wait for this Gemara. This is such an amazing Gemara. A few lines. Right. Now he says like this. Boy, right? Doesn't flat more than 50. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following shayla. Ragla achas b'soichnun amo, v'ragla achas chutz mechamishim amamal. He says, what happens if a bird has 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the 50 amos? We said a principle, right? A bird cannot hop more than 50 amos. Now, what happens if you have a bird that's 1 foot in and 1 foot out?
Unlikely.
Could happen.
It's hopped more than 50 hours.
He's right, but that's right. What's the rule? What do you do? What?
It's out. It's out.
And therefore,
He's a flyer.
he's a flyer. He's a flyer. Rabbi is not asking that. Rabbi Yirmiyah is not asking what?
Right, but
No, because Rabbi Yirmiyah is not asking that. Rabbi Yirmiyah is not asking that. Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying is responding to the klal. Rav Ukva set out a principle which is hopping birds do not hop more than 50 amos.
Yes.
Says Rabbi Birnbaum, if the bird is got 1 leg in and 1 leg out,
Then he's more than 50 hours.
and therefore what?
So therefore he's never. So therefore he's
Not hot.
50 hours.
What?
He's out. You flew in.
He-
It's no longer a hopping.
He hopped to the edge and fell over.
what? You know, he.
Slightly offside.
He could have rolled. He could have rolled.
Yeah, I want the thick lines or the thin lines.
No, you see. The point is that Rabbi Yirmiyah is not asking that. Rabbi Yirmiyah is assuming. Rabbi Yirmiyah is talking about a bird that can only hop. He's not talking about a bird that flies, right? And he says, what happens if the bird that is only a hopping bird, and he agrees with the principle that birds only hop 50 amos, what will happen when it suddenly puts 1 leg outside the 50 amos? That's his question.
But then it's
No, it hasn't. It's not a flying bird. It's a hopping bird.
It's hopped more than 50 hours.
And that's the problem. He's asking, what happens if it does? What happens if it goes outside the 50 amos?
Can you have it?
No.
What? 50 hours.
Wow, that's it. Ba'al says the Gemora, of Kul Rabiyim Midrasha. They threw him out of the base medrash. They threw him out. They threw him out because of that question. Why? Amazing, isn't it? We love questions. We're very inclusive. Anyone can ask questions. Not this question. Chuck him out. Throw him out of the base medrash. Amazing. Shocking. Why do they do that? Why do they throw him out? Reasonable question. The answer is, look at Tosfos. Third last Tosfos. This is such an important Gemara. Va'al do of Kul Rabiyim Midrasha. It's a large word va'al. You see that? Don't say that Rabbi Yirmiyah's problem, they didn't like Rabbi Yirmiyah's question because he asked something which is so unlikely. So unlikely, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Well, no, that wasn't a problem. Our Mishnah talks about that case. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah talks about a case where it's exact. Proximity, it's equidistant, and it says you divide the bird, right? Rabbeinu says like this: you know what to throw him out? Our bird cannot hop more than 50 amos. Even 1 foot. That is the way the sages measured something. If they established a principle and they told you that a bird cannot hop more than 50 amos, yes. That is not something you can then say, what happened if it did? What happened if it put 1 foot outside?
It breaks the principle.
Breaks the principle. And it means that you're not accepting the authority of Chazal, of the sages. And you can't do that. You broke the rules. It's an amazing thing. Rabbi Yirmiyah's question breaks the halachic system. And therefore we can't accept that. Not because we don't like Rabbi Yirmiyah. By the way, at the end of the Masechta, 160 odd pages later, he gets back in. There's another story. Yeah. No, seriously, I'm serious. He misses most of Bava Basra. But at the end of Bava Basra, there's another story where Rabbi Yirmiyah shows tremendous respect for this Chachamim. And it says, they brought him back into the basement, right? Because it's not like Rabbi Yirmiyah was a huge one of the Yamiram. The Gemara is telling you a massively important principle here. If Chazal say something in terms of this is, they establish a line, they draw a line in the sand, right? And they say, up to here and no more. You can't then ask, what if it's not like that? Because the Chachomim have to always have boundaries. If you don't have a boundary, you don't draw the boundary somewhere, there are no boundaries. Does that make sense, Eli? Do you understand? You know, you
Moving it.
yeah, you can't say like if Chazal established that a bird hops no more than 50 amas, that means it doesn't hop any more than 50 amas. And you can't say what if it does, because that's what they established. They established that's the fact. That's a fact, right? Yeah, I mean, yeah. You still want the bird. I know what you mean. You want to say the bird. You wanted to say the bird. What if it's out? Put its leg outside. It's a flying bird. But he wasn't asking that. That's the point. That's why it's confusing. It's a bit confusing with that Rashi. He wasn't asking that maybe. Okay, you find the bird a bit outside, and then you say, oh, what? It must have flown. He's not saying that. He's saying, what would be the halacha if you find a bird that's 1 foot outside? You know, does it still, for example, belong to the owner of the dovecote, right? This hopping bird. You know, can it go? The answer is it can't do that. You can't ask that question.
It undermines their authority, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you can have different one with a different sucking.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, 100%. You can have, of course, you can have different, different perspectives on things, but you've got to accept that when Chazal said a certain principle, like anything which doesn't go further than that, then that's it. You can't then ask, well, what if it just sticks a leg out? Yeah. But Mitzvah Hashem will carry this on next time.
Yeah.
Very fascinating Gemora. Yeah. Have a good evening, and to those on Zoom as well. Martin, we'll welcome you back in. But we'll welcome you back in like Raburia next. Yeah.
Yes, Hashem, when I'm not babysitting or
You're not
parenting.
What?
Or parenting.
Exactly. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
God
Have a
bless.
good week. Bye.